but I didn't modify the month. So yours says 13 September. I got your PowerPoint. So it's you know, who knows what time it is. See, we lost a whole month already. As goes with life sometimes. All right, we're going to continue our class that we have no idea what to name it because it's just whatever the environment is for New Testament. And it's New Testament survey, it's environment, it's, I don't know what it is. It's around the Bible. So we've been talking about the Roman Empire. And I got Chuck's slideshow from last week, and I'm moving down to the little ways and doing part of that. And maybe, I don't think I'll finish it, but I was like, hey, it's like, what's up with this? This stuff about the slaves and stuff. It's like, where'd that come from? And it's like, okay, let's change topic. So I'll put a divider there, so if I get to that, I do. If I don't. So we talked about classes of society is really what we talked about. And Chuck talked about those who are free, those who are not, the slaves, the people with, the people without. He talked about those kind of classes of people in the Roman Empire. If I can get there, ever.
It's a ways.
It's a ways.
Yeah. Those are the Roman Empire, and then the next one, that one.
About there is probably where I'm interested in. This is really, we're started looking at the Jews. Go Orange. A lot of shakeups last night, huh? With the football yesterday.
There's going to be some movement.
The changes with the transfer portal and the name, image, likeness thing, I think have probably shook up and equalized things better than anything they've ever tried in the past. The realms of we're the best and been the best for a long time, you can't see that in that. It's whoever pays for it. So it'll be the Yankees and the Dodgers type thing, you know, from there on. But not always, not always. So we had classes of Jews, got ordinary Jews, slaves, and the ruling elite class. And we're really started talking about the ruling / elite class, and we're going to talk a little bit about slaves if I get there. So there's 4 major schools of thought within the Jews. The Pharisees, they began as sages and scribes of the Torah. What's the Torah? First 5. Yeah, first 5 books. That's it. That's it. It's okay, you know. It's the law, whatever, you know, it's close enough. Yeah, it's just that. It's not the whole Old Testament. It's just the first 5, the law, as we typically call it. They also developed the Mishnah, which is the oral traditions or the oral Torah, and the Gemara, which is rabbinical interpretations and commentaries on the Mishnah. So it's an interpretation of an interpretation. So essentially, if you took your Bible, and if you got one of those ones with the wide columns, and you made notes, as you study and stuff, you made notes, that would be kind of like the Mishnah. And then the Gemara would be if somebody else came in there and read your notes to interpret your interpretation, and or a committee or whatever, is kind of how that goes. And that gets passed down.
You look at commentary. Commentary, we've got Clark's commentary.
Yeah.
And the one on the New Testament. You look at the New Testament Bible, it's, maybe a quarter of an inch thick. But the commentary,
Yeah.
it's 3 inches thick.
I owned a copy of Kaufman's. We got it when we got married. Kaufman's commentary was like 24 books. You know, the man wrote it over, 30 years or something. Luckily, it's online now. I don't have to look through 30 books. But yeah, it expands. And his commentary, in particular with Kaufman comments on other commentaries a lot of times. What they've got right, what he thinks they've got wrong. And I would say even some of that gets into being the Gemara type thing. It's commentaries on commentary, interpretations of somebody's interpretations. So that became law.
What they used it as being law, and that's when they accused Christ of breaking the law.
Right.
It's because he broke what they wrote in the Mishnah and Gemara, not what was in the Torah.
Yeah, God's word's the Torah, and then you add the Mishnah, and then you add the Gemara, and they're accusing him of something out here, which is something somebody's done, filled in the gaps of, whatever. And that's what they've accused him of. Yeah, the washing of your hands, how to wash your cup, how to things you can do and can't do, and the half-mile journey on a Sabbath. I don't think that's in the Bible either. But some of those kind of things is what they've added. And, yeah, healing somebody. It wasn't addressed in the Torah. But it became somewhere down the line. It may not even been there because they could basically add to that with an interpretation of an interpretation. Hey, we see this. It don't look right. So that's how they go. They were the dominant Jewish sect that survived the destruction of Jerusalem. The Sadducees developed from the priests and the allied elites, rigid adherence to the Old Testament Torah, specifically Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And they ceased to exist after the destruction of Jerusalem. So the Sadducees more stuck to the word. The Pharisees had the interpretation. And those two are who you see a lot in the New Testament. They follow and hound Jesus about wherever he goes. They're the ones that end up, they plot to kill Jesus. Their plot goes as far as 6 trials and hanging him on the cross. That's how far they went. And the Sanhedrin is Pharisees and Sadducees. I don't think I've ever heard that it included somebody from another school of thought.
They would have accepted the zealot.
Yeah, the zealot kind of fit in. The zealots, revolutionaries dedicated to separation from Rome, they didn't like Rome over them. They could have probably accepted a zealot. The Romans crushed them in 70 AD when, and the Essenes, they were apolitical and may have emerged as a sect of dissident priests, ceased to exist following the destruction of Jerusalem. I've seen that they weren't, right, the Zealots wanted to overthrow Rome. The Essenes wanted to pull out and leave. It's something I read. The Dead Sea Scrolls are attributed to the Essenes. So, for those who want to know. And I know those are, although they back up a lot of the biblical texts we have, some of them are also, don't back that up, non-canonical type thing.
The Pharisees surviving because their center of power wasn't necessarily the temple.
Yeah, their power wasn't the temple. It was their interpretation. They were the lawyers, you know. Yeah, that's where tort law comes from. Yeah, it comes from stuff like that. I'll give you that. Yeah. There are gray areas, and that was their thing. But they used it to convict people more than let people out. So that's probably the thing. So we're going to look at Pharisees, Sadducees, and one zealot is what we're going to look at today. Chuck had this chart last week too. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, it kind of compares them. Where the Pharisees represented the common man, the Sadducees represented the elite ruling class. Pharisees believed in the rabbinic interpretations, the Mishnah, the Gemara. Sadducees only believed in the Torah, God's word. Pharisees were eclectic, popular, and democratic, whereas the Sadducees were conservative, aristocratic, monarchists, whatever. Man, there's a lot of letters in there. Considered the most expert and accurate expositors on the Jewish law were the Pharisees. The Sadducees, we were experts in the Torah. Purity laws applied outside the temple for the Pharisees. Purity laws only applied in the temple of the Sadducees. Pharisees interpreted the Torah liberally. And I think by liberally it means we can use that everywhere. Not that they just gave grace everywhere and they could use it wherever they wanted to use it.
Well, they also could, their interpretation was the Mishnah Gemara. So it said this, well, I can interpret it and say, well, this. Whereas the Sadducees, you can see there is, what does it say? That's it.
Yeah, the Sadducees are what it says is that's it. Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead, the messianic age, and the literal resurrection of the body. Sadducees did not. They did not believe in that, and they disappeared. They disappeared with the temple, or is that we all disappear with the temple?
They all basically disappeared.
Yeah.
Because the synagogues were more or less run by the Pharisees.
Synagogues more or less run by the Pharisees, and they're not an authorized. The Sadducees wouldn't have done a synagogue because it's not authorized by the text by any means. The Pharisees had their own interpretation. If there was 10 Jewish men in a community, they could build a synagogue, and they met there to worship. Our our worship style is similar to synagogue worship, at least what we know of it. But yeah, the Sadducees would not have done that. Yeah, if you're in hiding, what would you do? Pharisees believed in free will, but God has the foreknowledge of human destiny. Sadducees believed in free will. Pharisees had belief in the afterlife. Sadducees, no afterlife. We'll take a look at a few of these. So Matthew 3, 7 through 10. When he saw many Pharisees and Sadducees coming to watch him baptize, he denounced them. "You brood of snakes," he exclaimed. "Who warned you to flee the coming wrath? Prove by the way you live that you have repented of your sins and turned to God. Don't just say to each other, 'We're safe, for we are descendants of Abraham.' It means nothing, for I tell you, God can create children of Abraham from these stones. Even now, the axe of God's judgment is poised, ready to sever the roots of the trees. Yes, every tree that does not produce good fruit will be chopped down and thrown into the fire." So this is John the Baptist. This is who we're talking about. How did John the Baptist respond when he saw the Pharisees and Sadducees? Because he's baptizing right in the Jordan, I guess, right? Okay, baptizing in Jordan. And the Sadducees and Pharisees show up to watch. How does he respond to that?
Didn't exactly say glad you're here.
No, he didn't say, "Glad you're here, get in line, here's your number." He calls them a brood of snakes, a family of snakes, a gang of snakes. Who warned you to flee the coming wrath? Brood of vipers is, yeah.
You could have a garter snake, but vipers?
Viper, an angry, poisonous, venomous snake. An angry, venomous snake is what he really called them. And that's, as you see his dealing with them, that's what they are. They're ready to strike. They're coiled up, and they're ready to strike, and they're ready to shut down, the gospel. Chuck?
Well, yeah, if you look at it, they're not bringing anybody to God.
No.
They're killing them. Spiritually, they're killing them. So that's, from that standpoint, they are vital.
Yeah. One of the next slides that's what Jesus says to them. You're killing people. You're not bringing them to God. You're literally killing them. So yeah, that's what he calls them. And he sees this as them. Did I get that on there? No. Yeah, it's up there. What did the Pharisees and Sadducees believe that gave them the confidence that they were right with God? Why did they think they were right and probably wouldn't need, not probably, they wouldn't need the baptism of repentance? They wouldn't need. They're the sons of Abraham. We've got the blood, right? It's in my blood. I'm gold.
It brings up the question to me, why did the Lord choose them as the people? I would think that they were supposed to be a light to the world, where they would bring more people into believing in God, rather than being clannish and edifying themselves as above everybody else.
Yeah, and you see that. I'll tell you what. You start with like the Book of Judges, and they do what's right in their own eyes, and at that point, there's this cycle that as they do what's right to them, they start falling away from God, and God sends the neighbors in some form or whatever, the Pharisees, the Moabites, or whatever. They war on them or cause some kind of panic, and then the God's people are like, things were better when we followed God, so they would turn back to God. So the Book of Judges is this cycle, and you'll see it over and over, but it just gets to be a bigger circle. With the captivity, the Assyrian captivity, 10 of the tribes just fall away and they're overtaken and they never show up again. The 2 tribes are taken by Babylon. They go away, and 35, 50,000 people trickle back into Israel. And the time that Jesus came is the perfect time, the complete time. The Jews were in such a bad shape that they were done. They weren't They weren't saving people anymore. Everything had changed. I mean, there was a point in time back in Nehemiah when they forgot to, weren't reading the Torah. You know, that hadn't been read in years. They hadn't done the Passover. Something else. 70 years. Oh, through Babylon, yeah.
Oh, Babylon.
They didn't keep any of that stuff. They didn't.
In fact, they did not have the Ark of the Covenant, so it didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, they lost the Ark of the Covenant somewhere. They fell apart. But that's also, you can't earn your place in heaven. You can't get it because of your bloodline. All that's shot. The AD 70 with the destruction of Jerusalem. That's another thing that there's no more bloodline. There's no more records. There's no more. The bloodline was tainted at that point anyways because they lived amongst the Babylonians and they were. It all fails to exist anymore. The only way is through Christ. Chuck?
Well, they forgot. Abraham wasn't chosen because he was worthy. It's because God wanted him.
God chose Abraham, but not because of worthy.
Yeah. So they thought, well, I have the blood of Abraham. He was worthy, so I'm worthy. No. That was a flaw in the reasoning.
That's a flaw. Yeah, definitely a flaw. They're also from the son of promise, not the son of
Son of man. Or
Son of man.
Yeah, just not the son of man, but the physical son of man, or the spiritual son.
So yeah, and you find that's a theme that goes through it, that Jesus is the son of Abraham, but not, he is bloodline, but he's God's way of salvation. What did John the Baptist say would happen when the Pharisees and Sadducees faced God's judgment? Although they believed they were saved because they had the blood of Abraham, what did he say would happen? Thrown into the fire. They're not producing good fruit. They'll be cut, chopped down, thrown into the fire. Not a place you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that, and they did. Matthew 3. I mean, there's 28 chapters in Matthew. They heard this pretty early on right here that that's the case. It was a theme that just continues on. Did you not hear me? He who has ears, let him hear. Verily, verily, I say unto you. Matthew 16, 1 through 4. One day the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to test Jesus, demanding that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. He replied, you know the saying, red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow? Red sky in the morning means foul weather all day? Apparently like today. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you do not know how to interpret the signs of the times. Only an evil, adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign. But the only sign I'm going to give you is the sign of the prophet Jonah. Then Jesus left them and went away. So they're standing there like, we need a sign. We need a miraculous sign. We need a sign from heaven to show your authority. And he goes, no. He just walks away.
16.
This is Matthew 16.
Well into his ministry.
Yeah, well into his ministry. Yeah, his ministry hadn't started in 3. It was still John the Baptist's ministry. It's well into his ministry. They're still hounding him. And he's like, no. What was wrong with what they asked for? What was wrong with what the Pharisees and Sadducees asked for? They asked for a miraculous sign from heaven. What's wrong with that?
Everything else.
Yeah, they'd ignored everything else.
If they'd have checked into it, where he was born, all the things that were being satisfied in prophecy, I think, what we have, 330, 360?
Something, a lot of prophecies. Hundreds.
If they just went down the line and then looked at his authority because of the spirit that was in him to do the things that he did.
You see, yeah, they're already past the healing ministry. You're seeing miracles upon miracles, and they don't. None of that's credited.
Well,
Looking for a sign. Go ahead, Lori.
he relates it to, you can interpret the sky, you can interpret that sort of thing, but here I am, you've been schooled in all of this prophecy for years and years, and you're not seeing it, or you don't want to see it.
Yeah, you've been schooled in this. You're the experts in the Torah. You're the experts in this interpretation of it. But you don't see. They're looking for a sign, basically from heaven, from the sky. But even the red sky at night, red sky in the morning thing, how faithful is that?
The sailors.
Yeah, the sailors warning.
Sailors take warning.
Is it always right?
Sailors, they're right.
Is it always right? Not really. You know, there's a gazillion-dollar industry in predicting the weather a little bit better, unless you buy into conspiracy theory that meteorologists in the Midwest actually control the weather and they dictate what happens. That's a weird conspiracy theory to me, that meteorologist in Kansas says this will happen and it happens. I don't. But anyways, I love conspiracy theories for being conspiracy theories, but even if you read the sky, it's not always right, and not every, and who could, if it's red sky at night, who knows what color red is? Everybody knows what color red is. You look at it, okay, that's a simple thing, but they're missing that. I thought I had something else on there, but I guess I don't. Oh, I know where it is. If you go back to Job 1:16, this is where the messengers show up to Job and tell him what happened at his house. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep, and the servants consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you." So along the same thing with what's wrong with the Pharisees and Sadducees with what they asked for. In Job, was this a miraculous sign from heaven? It says, fire of God fell from heaven and burned up sheep, servants, and that's not a miraculous sign from heaven, is it? But that's what it says right there in the text. That's what the messenger saw, and that's what he reports it. So what is it? It's Satan, right? But it came from the sky. And the Pharisees and Sadducees, if they saw that same sign, if that happened right in front of them, would they misinterpret that as a sign from heaven? They wouldn't be interested anyways, to be honest. But, even if they had a sign like that, these things can be misinterpreted, is really where I was going to go with that. So what we've talked about, what were the Pharisees and Sadducees ignoring? The miraculous signs all around them. They've seen it. They have followed him and hounded him. They have seen these things. Do you think Saul saw that stuff? That's outside of the class, but do you think Saul, who becomes the Apostle Paul, do you think he watched, I don't want to use too many words to sound alike, do you think he watched all this stuff? I think he did.
Power of Beelzebub, that's how it does it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, power of Beelzebub. Through the power of Satan, he does this great stuff. He heals people through the power of Satan. He casts out demons. I think Saul was there. I think that's part of him becoming an apostle, that he watched all this kind of thing. But there's other guys that did too, Nicodemus and those guys, they watched. But they didn't buy in. Matthew 16, 5 through 12. Later, after they crossed to the other side of the lake, the disciples discovered, oh, I want to, Brent? Oh. My side is not what I used to.
That's all right. The Pharisees and the Sadducees had so much against each other, but when it came to dealing with Jesus, they went together.
The actions of evil.
To actually protest against Jesus, and they came together, and it was just interesting that normally I don't think they agreed on that much stuff.
No,
but
they agreed on too much.
But when it came to Jesus, they were like, we got to pull this together. We're
going to lose our place. We're going to lose everything we've worked so hard for. Yeah, they both crave power. Yeah. And with power, you can print your own money, whatever. So in Matthew 16, verse 5 through 12, later after they crossed to the other side of the lake, the disciples discovered they had forgotten to bring any bread. Watch out, Jesus warned them. Beware of the yeast the Pharisees and Sadducees. In some versions I know say, be aware of the leaven. At this point, they began to argue with each other, because like as Brent said, they didn't like each other anyways, because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, you have so little faith. Why are you arguing with each other about having no bread? Don't you even understand yet? Don't you remember the 5,000 I fed with 5 loaves and the baskets of leftovers you picked up? Or the 4,000 I fed with 7 loaves and a large basket of leftovers you picked up? Why can't you understand that I'm not talking about bread? So again, I said, this is about like talking to a kid, isn't it? So again, I said, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then at last they understood, oh yeah. But he wasn't talking to them about the yeast and bread, but about the deceptive teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now I'm sure the Pharisees realized it was the deceptive teaching of the Sadducees, and the Sadducees realized it was the deceptive teaching of the Pharisees, and did not apply it in their own selves by any means. Jesus warns them. What did he warn them about? The leaven, the yeast, their teaching. How did they react? What's that?
Jesus was talking spiritually.
Yeah.
They took it.
They took it very literal, not spiritual at all. And once he even points it out, it says they understood at last.
It's one of those.
It's one of those. He sees through our game. We're going to have to do something different. The leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, I got this list. I got this off Kaufman. It's a good list. Some of the stuff they taught, and we know to be false. Jesus couldn't be the Messiah because Elijah had not yet come. We know Elijah and John the Baptist, we see it as the same. They taught that his signs were not from heaven but from earth. They taught that his demons were exorcised by the power of Satan. They taught that he was a violator of ancient traditions, that he profaned the Sabbath. They taught that Jesus was from Galilee and not Bethlehem. They taught that none of the rulers of the people believed in him. They taught that they knew he was a sinner, that he was a glutton, a winebibber, a Samaritan, a friend of tax collectors, sinners, and a deceiver. These are some of the kind of things that they taught. And we all know that these are all false. But
It's true.
yeah, he was a friend of tax collectors and sinner.
Yep.
And
That's why it's called the Great Physician. He came to heal.
yeah, but he's not one of them, but he's a friend of them. You're right, a great physician like that. Yeah, I agree with you on that. But they start using this little doubt and these little things, and they convince other people just with little bitty statements. They can convince people that Jesus was not the Messiah. And, wouldn't you think he would hang out with someone other than tax collectors? Wouldn't you think he wouldn't go near a pub? Wouldn't you think he wouldn't heal somebody on the Sabbath? They would use this little doubt. You'll hear this trick today. This is one of Satan's greatest tools, is doubt. You'll hear it. They got an election going on. You'll hear it if you turn on the TV. You'll hear this everywhere. This is one of their tricks. You might not see it. It's that leaven in there that brings everything out. Matthew 22, 23 through 28, the same day, Sadducees came to him and say there is no resurrection. Who say there is no. So the Sadducees don't believe in resurrection. And they ask him this great question. Teacher, Moses said if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So to the second and third, and to the 7th. After them the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. So these people don't believe in resurrection, but they ask a question about as complicated and loopy as you could possibly get about resurrection. What leaven did the Sadducees use in this attempt to trap him? They didn't understand heaven at all. That's really what it is, yeah. They're applying the creation rules to heaven. They were trying to show that he, from just looking at it, could you guess whose wife that she would be? You know, you couldn't. By their own rules, it's either the first or the seventh would be my guess. By their own rules, if they believed in resurrection, which is the kind of the trick question too, because they didn't believe it in anyways. But Jesus gave them a different answer. But Jesus answered them, "You are wrong." That's his answer. Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. So yeah, people that don't believe in resurrection, their thoughts are which dead person is married to which dead person. And with Jesus' explanation to it, he's the God of the living. And the only way to get there is through a resurrection. But they're also not married. And they're like angels. So he gives them, like I said, he shows understanding that they couldn't have come up with if they wanted to. That was just nowhere near what they would have done.
So the debate I'm trying to say, they'll choose either the first one or
Yeah,
the seventh one, and we can argue against that.
right. They would argue against the first.
Whatever he picks, we can argue against.
They'd argue against it because the real trick was the resurrection in there anyways. Yeah, any of it. When are you going to stop beating your wife? It's a question kind of like that, you know. There's no right answer to that, you know. So when the crowd hears this, how do they react? Astonished. That's a good word. That's a really good word. I dare you to use that today at lunch. You go out to lunch and they ask you, "How are you?" Astonished. Just use that and see how astonished they are. So, yeah, the crowd's astonished. It's something different. How do you think the Sadducees reacted to this? That's it. Okay, we're done. Where can we go? Where can we go? And it says that in the next verse, Matthew 22:34. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, yeah, because they're just like, they met together to question him again. One of them, so it's the Pharisees' turn now, one of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question. "Teacher, which is the most important commandment of the law of Moses?" Remember, they're experts. Which is the most important? The experts not only in the law, but the interpretation of the law and the interpretation into the interpretation of the law. And Jesus, so you'd have to know through that interpretation of the interpretation, which those, take the 10 Commandments or the Deuteronomical laws, and figure out which one's most important. Jesus replies, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law is, and all the commandments of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments." So what leaven did the Pharisees throw out there to bait the trap? Pick the greatest law. Pick the most important law. Jesus' answer? Yeah, this is, love your Lord and God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. The first commandment, I know when you read Exodus 20, I am the Lord your God. If you stop there, you don't even need to read the rest of it. You know, if you stop there and understand that, the rest of it doesn't apply. The 10 Commandments are broken, I think it's 6 and 4. There's 6 commandments of how to love God and 4 commandments of how to love your neighbor, or it might be 4 and 6, but it's one way or the other. And I think these 2 things, that you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, I think that's part of, I'm going to say Shema, but I know it's not. I think Shema is actually love your neighbors yourself, but you must love your Lord your God with all your heart. That's what it is. That's part of a section called the Shema, but the Shema is really where it starts out. It says, "Hear, O Israel," and then it says that. But anyway, so those are 2 things. I think they're both from Deuteronomy, but that's the answer. What's the goal of the questions from the Sadducees and Pharisees? Their goal was to show that he didn't know God's word. If you don't know God's word, you can't have authority. That was their goal, that he didn't know it as well as they did. They failed. They failed in their mission. He knew it way better than them, and they basically both have been silenced. Matthew 22, 41 through 46. Then, surrounded by the Pharisees, Jesus asked them a question. Oh, it's a battle now. What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? They replied, he's the son of David. Jesus responded, then why does David, speaking under the inspiration of the Spirit, call the Messiah my Lord? For David said, the Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand till I crumble your enemies beneath my feet. Since David called the Messiah my Lord, how can the Messiah be his son? No one can answer them. And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Let's go ahead with the plan and we'll just kill him. What did Jesus do in response to questions of the Pharisees and Sadducees? He throws out his own question. What's the paradox that they were unable to resolve? It's time is really what it is. He's the son, the Messiah is the son of David, but the Messiah is the Lord of David. So how can you be both? In a timeless world, it just works that way. I still got 1 minute? Yeah. How about that? I'll leave that to you. I don't think I really added any more slides to your show. I had a couple up there earlier, but I don't think I've added anything since then. Oh, I did. I added one right here. No, all I did was I added underlining. That's all I did. I'll leave that with you. Slide 25. Yeah. 25. So, anyways, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they continue to harp on Jesus. They continue to drag him down. You can see their place. You can see their beliefs. And you can also see where they're not in coordination with what God really wants. So, and I know Chuck will get into the fact that how they bent the law to work in their favor, or as they put Jesus on trial. So, all right, thank you for this morning.